In the face of the world turning a blind eye, a bunch of Australian-based journalists, 5 of them, young guys in their 20s, went to East Timor to find out what was going on. And they went to a small border town of Balibo.
This is Dili, where we are, and this is Balibo, near the Indonesian border.
At the heart of the whole story is the fact that these 5 journalists were executed for pursuing their profession, the truth, bringing the truth to the world, and it was covered up.
Now, if we hark back to 75, when this film's set, these guys got on a plane. They were in their mid-20s. They had a few rolls of reversal film. Telephone communication was limited and very expensive. They had no ability to talk to Australia at all.
They were warned of the danger, but they were warned that they were told to get the story at any cost.
Shackleton, it's not worth it. Believe me or don't believe me, but it's just not safe.
Well, outside Balibo, is there anywhere else we can film the invasion from? Let's go, boys.
Jose Ramos-Horta arranged for the Channel 7 journalists to make their way to Balibo. He provided a car and a driver and told them that it was the perfect vantage point to look down and see the Indonesian ships that were in Timor waters and the impending attack. And when the Channel 9 journalists arrived a few days later, Ramos-Horta actually drove them up there. So they all collectively spent some time there with Horta. And he returned to Dili with some of their footage, which we now know is quite, incredible footage of the Indonesian pending attack.
Ramos-Horta arranged it.
Horta?
Yes.
So you actually spent 2 nights with just the journalists, and was the Fretilin in Balibo that night?
Yeah, in Balibo that night. I told them to leave. I said, listen, better leave. But they said, no, we are not leaving. We can get film some action. And so we stayed, and I left.
And did you think at that point that Balibo was going to get invaded any day?
Yeah, but I also thought they would not kill the journalists.
I think they cared about the country enough to know the tragedy that was about to unfold. These men were faced with an opportunity to capture footage that would have perhaps helped stall Indonesia's invasion. This footage would have been evidence for the world. I think when faced with that, the men made a courageous decision that morning to stay.
Brian felt that was his story. He said, I just got that infinity with the people of East Timor.
Where's Shackleton? The border. That's where the story is. That's where we're going.
No, but Shackleton's crazy.
He's just doing his job.
Yeah, and we can't let him get out of there before we do.
Did the fact that there were 2 networks there, 3 journalists were from Channel 7, 2 were from Channel 9, make it very difficult for them to pull out? And if there had been 1 network, perhaps they may have.
John did tell Greg, if you don't get the story and someone else does, you're out of here.
I do know that Tony Manatti, who was the ABC journalist there, he pulled himself out, and he was wrapped over the knuckles for it.
If you go away and survive a thing like that and report it, you're a hero for the rest of your life. If you get killed, you're an idiot. Shouldn't have been.
Chris came into my room at the Turismo, and he knocked on the door, and he came and he just sat. I was working at the desk or something. He just sat on the end of the bed and started crying. And he said, "They're all dead." And I said, "Who?" And he said, "Oh, we said Balibo's been overrun."
The Australian government was warned ahead of time. I think they were told by the Indonesian government, you have journalists here, we cannot offer protection to them, so you should get them out. And no effort was made to get them out at all. And after they went missing, there was no effort to try and even find them.
The price of silence, the pragmatism of that silence, meant that on December the 7th, when Indonesia invaded, they had no signal at all from the Australian government that they were concerned about this murder, and that they blatantly sought out the only remaining journalist in Dili and took him to the wharf and shot him, is a ramification of that silence. And I think that in a minute way that tells the story of what happens if we let the deaths of the Balibo 5 go without justice. If you imagine that 5 months after the end of Vietnam, these young guys are killed, that this really is a turning point in the way big, powerful nations viewed the role of journalists and what they would do to actually stop those journalists telling the truth. I think, you know, Indonesia had clearly seen that the Vietnam War had turned around because of what journalists had done. And so they executed these men.
This was the first time that journalists, that to my knowledge, certainly that journalists had been murdered because they were there on the spot.
I know that in the Vietnam War, I think there were 75 journalists were killed, but none of them were killed because they were journalists.
Some people said perhaps it was their fault that they got killed. And I'm sorry, they were not doing a 9-to-5 job, they were doing a job employed by their Channel 9 and Channel 7. And that's a story that went through the years, that they were inexperienced and should not have been there.
Really? They're journalists. They're supposed to be there. They're supposed to tell the truth. They're supposed to educate people on what they are not privy to. How is it that they're not supposed to be there?
People were fed lies about what had actually happened to the journalists, that they were killed in crossfire, that it was part of a civil war, etc. And that cover-up more or less had continued for the next 30 years.
6 months ago they had an inquest, and in that inquest, finally, there was admissions by people that things were done incorrectly. There were admissions that there was, you know, some form of collusion between the Australian government and the Indonesian government. The Indonesian government just recently fessed up. They basically said, yes, we did all these things, but no one is going after the people who are still alive, who are war criminals and have been promoted and are now conducting the same kind of campaigns in Papua.
People's initial feeling is that the power of the Balibo 5 story is where the story is at. But through that story you find out about this country and the tragedy of what befell East Timor and the 200,000 Timorese that died under Indonesian occupation.
I have 24 years stories. How long will that take you to record?